it will work.
Fabulous.
So just please note that we are now recording, and that anything, things that you say, if you've got your camera on, all of that will be on the on the record, if you like. The purpose of the recording is so that we can share the information that comes from this session, and the recording will be hosted in the NHS Carers Futures platform. And if you don't have access to that, then please contact NHS Think Carers email box. So thank you very much for that. The next thing I just wanted to talk about was the timings, so that you all know when we're going to get a break. So we're starting now, and our first session will last until 2:20, and then we're going to have a short break for 10 minutes, and then we'd like you to come back at 2:30, and then we will be magically taken back to the main room at 2:55 to 3. And believe me, it happens suddenly. It's a very odd experience. I've been asked to advise you that during the break, we'd be really grateful if you could stay in this room, maybe just switch your camera off, cup of tea, and then come back. And then we're just going to stay in here. If anybody's got any questions, then please use the chat box. I've just had an ask for someone to mute the chat bleeps, if that is at all possible. There's a way of doing that. If you press the 3 buttons, you'll see that there's a way of muting that. Hopefully those chat bleeps will chill out as we get started. But yes, if you don't mind. Okay, so the first set of slides we have is from Teresa Bainbridge. Teresa, are you with us?
Hello.
Hello.
I wish you hadn't mentioned how many people were on the call. I've suddenly got a little bit nervous.
Just don't look. Don't look.
So I'm trying to block it out. I'm trying to block the beeps out, and I'm trying to block it out. But I just thought I'd put that out there because I'm sure you're a very supportive group. But all of a sudden I got quite nervous when you mentioned 80 odd people. But I suppose it's very different being in the flesh anyway, isn't it? So it's probably a bit easier online. So can everybody hear me okay? Is that working? Okay, fabulous. Excuse me. So do you want me to just crack on and do my presentation? Is that?
Yeah, Teresa, if you just say next slide, then
I haven't got control of this. Right, could I have the next slide then, please?
If you just say next slide, then Helen move it along. We want to keep it as simple as possible.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you. Sorry, just to give everybody a little bit of context, I've come to talk to you from Doncaster Council. I have actually been in post 16 days. The lady who was doing the job previously actually did this piece of work. So as you can appreciate, I'm presenting on her behalf, and I certainly don't want to take any credit for the hard work that she's done. Her name was Ange Waite. The work that we did as part of this was around the identification and support for ethnic minority carers in GP surgeries and local practices. And the question I suppose you would ask yourselves is, why did we choose ethnic minority carers in local practice? The reasons being we had an historic under-identification, under-recording and under-engagement of ethnic minority carers through that particular channel. National research identifies that, particularly in relation to ethnic minority young carers, there are barriers to engaging with statutory health services, and there are direct links, as we all know, between poverty, ill health, race and identification and support for ethnic minority carers. Referrals to our ethnic minority carer service, young and old, so our adult carer services and younger carer services, which are separated in Doncaster at the moment, across the region did not correlate with the population, the percentage of ethnic minority population figures, and there were low referrals to our carer service from GP surgeries. Next slide, please. So what went well? We felt we took a very empowering and engaging approach to this, when carers were involved at the very beginning, at the inception of the project, and we really co-produced. We had a carer on the board leading the application and working on an ongoing basis through this, and we felt that was a real positive to how we took it forward and delivered an impacted change. The focus groups that we did enabled us to have conversations and have a real deep understanding of of what carers' experiences were, and I think that enabled us in gaining a deep understanding to really try and influence and shape change to have a positive impact. It enabled us to broker fresh relationships with influential leaders within the primary care networks for Doncaster and beyond, and it enabled carers sort of to raise the profile within carers networks. So we became a part of ethnic minority forums such as our Minorities Partnership Board, again, which improves carer experience across the board. The learning has been embedded into our work going forward. So we've undertaken a carer strategic review, which has had the learning from the project embedded. We're looking at refresh strategy, which again will take forward the lessons learned and build upon them. And we're looking to reshape our carer services, which I've made reference to already, and that again will the learning will be fed into that. We were also able through the work to sort of promote a specific route to the Carers Time for You grant, which enabled us to increase opportunities for ethnic minority carers to access a small pot of funding in order to enable them to sustain their caring role, which I thought was really, really useful. And the development of ethnic minority carer resources, so information, advice and guidance that was shaped around the particular needs of that community, those communities. And we were able to gain a pledge from practices in order to deliver improved engagement with ethnic minority carers, which again has a positive impact on ethnic minority carers' experience. Next slide, please. I had to ask Ange what she meant by change ups when she said change ups on the slide, but what she meant was what would we do differently to improve if we were to do this piece of work again. And I think there were sort of three main areas where we would look at how we would improve that. Particularly, we'd have a bit of better contingency planning. So that we sought to engage with quite a wide range of practices, and whilst we had a good uptake, I think we would probably have targeted more with recognition that not all would engage readily, and at the start of it. We felt we could probably have done with more time. So whilst we had some really, really good engagement with particularly hidden ethnic minority groups, we felt that we could, with more time, we could have engaged with a much wider range of ethnic minority groups. And I think obviously this project was done during COVID times, so we sort of planned for focus groups being online, like a lot of things are nowadays. But we had to, we did a really good piece of work with the travelling community, and we had to physically go out and engage with those groups, obviously when it was safe to do so. And I think we would plan for a better and wider range of engagement that suited all community needs going forward. Next slide, please. So what were the sort of findings and recommendations from this piece of work? So we were able to influence the practice contracts in order to include the as early identification as possible of carers in general, but particularly ethnic minority carers. We were able to identify the best ways to support ethnic minority carers in local practices through the local practices. So we didn't only shape and influence those practices, but we widened it to be within the whole primary care network provision. And we made recommendations about how we could actively apply and sort of embed the work in order to move forward and improve the offer. We found that increasing the competition between the local surgeries also built traction and improved the offer for all of our carers. We've got some training planned in for the local practices that we worked with, which we hope to push out further, which is around the training and identification in terms of the identification and support for primary care staff across the board. So not just those that have a sitting consultation, but those who support in answering the phone, in meeting people at reception, and all across the whole sort of board. and we felt it was an opportunity to have a further push in terms of the GP carer quality standards, to influence and shape that. Next slide, please. So, what were the benefits of taking part? You can see there's quite a lot there on the list. There's huge benefits from the project. We felt that obviously through involvement, we really strengthened the ethnic minority carer voice, which had a significant impact. Again, as I've mentioned previously, we involved carers from start to finish, and we ended up thinking throughout, sort of outside of the box in terms of engagement. So we had the service was going out and building relationships through local shops in order to engage with our Gypsy traveller community. And that took a lot of time and a lot of persuasion. But when we were able to sort of get into that community, have conversations, understand what the challenges were, understand what the barriers were, we were really able to then influence and shape how that looked going forward. The learning, as I previously mentioned, the learning from the project has had a positive impact not only on the practices that we worked with, but across the primary care network. And I feel that's something that we can really roll out in going forward. As mentioned previously, again, the Minorities Partnership Board, we've raised the profile of carers. We've raised, we're working much more proactively with them. So we've built some real partnerships there now that will have a positive impact going forward. And the work that we've done has been used to inform not only, as I said, our services, but the council's equality, diversity and inclusion work. Through the work that we've done, we've been able to create meaningful linkages between our sort of Changing Lives ethnic minority family provision as well, and the GP surgeries and the service that delivers carer support. So we've started to build a much more supportive and encompassing service available for people. The local practices have improved what's been offered. How support is offered for ethnic minority family carers. A recent example of this is, I think there was the outcomes of the work shaped some of the standard operating procedures for the vaccination programme rollout. All of the local practices that were involved in the work signed up to employees for carers, and we've influenced at a very strategic level as well through our all-age joint commissioning meetings, our primary care network, ethnic minority networks, and we've really given the whole ethnic minority carers a real platform through which to shape and influence and continue to raise awareness and raise a profile and improve support that's available. And as previously mentioned, the findings from all the work will be taken forward and embedded within our strategic review, our strategy work, and the services that we commission in the future going forward. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time today. Are there any questions?
Teresa, thank you very much. It's an incredible piece of work. And what I'd like to do now is just sort of coordinate some questions and answers. I do, however, want to repeat your point about the amount of time that you have been in post. Could you tell us again, actually, how long you've been in post?
So I started on the 1st of July. I thought as I started on the 1st of July, I better turn up for my first day, but then I did have some annual leave with it being the school holidays. So I'd say technically I've been in post about 8 or 9 days. Really? Okay. Certainly working days, yeah. So,
and here you are.
So please be gentle with me. Yeah.
You're in front of the nation talking about piece of work. So I would add that caveat into the questions. It's an incredible piece of work and an incredible example of joint working, I think, that comes from South Yorkshire and Basset Law. And you may have heard Angela Waite, Teresa mentioned her name, and I think it's really only fair that we mention Ange's kind of name as part of this work, who kind of brought it all together. So with that in mind, what we're going to do is look at some of the questions that have come up in the box. The other thing, just before we start that, is we are working in this crazy world of Teams, and I do feel that a lot of time we're fixing stuff. Slides aren't being shared terribly well. I appreciate that. Any individuals that don't have access to the slides, please email me and I'll email them across. From a group perspective, what we're going to do is all of the slides from today, this presentation and the next, will all be available on the Futures platform, and we'll get a link to that. I have kind of requested through the magic of these things that we get that link up sooner rather than later. So we will do everything we can to get the slides to you as quickly as possible. One of the questions that I noticed, Teresa, was with regards to the Royal College of GPs. And I wondered, I'm aware that the quality markers work that you mentioned, that work was sort of signed off or went through the Royal College of GPs. I wonder, to expand on that question, what health involvement did you have with this work? I'm aware that...
Well, we did have quite a high level of involvement. So I think there was I can't actually remember his name, which is awful, but there was a professor involved in terms of the inception, in terms of sort of managing and moving the work forward. And I think he's had real oversight and involvement, which has really helped to sort of shape and cascade that message down. I feel
No,
terrible for
VJ
not being able to
Kumar.
remember his
His
name.
name is
That's it.
Professor
Thank you.
VJ.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. Yes, no. So he was really sort of pivotal, if you like, in sort of pushing that forward. And I think he certainly used it as an opportunity to really promote the lessons learned from it and how that will shape and influence everybody's sort of provision going forward. But he was very involved, and he was involved from the beginning. He's been involved in the planning, the evaluation, and everything like that. So yeah.
No, a great example of, as I think a lot of carers work is, of this kind of joint working between health and social care. So I will post Professor Kumar's name in the chat box. Another question we had from Gail Ewing, Teresa, was about the level of engagement. I'm aware that the kind of COVID restrictions, I guess, in an ideal world, a lot of the work would have been done face to face. How did you overcome those problems, and what level of engagement did you get with carers?
So we have an existing service that's quite good in terms of engaging with an existing group. So we have an existing ethnic minority group. Obviously, we engage with them, but we sought to engage much more widely than that. So we went through our known ethnic minority networks. We did, as I think I alluded to in the presentation, I think it started off given the restrictions that we were in, we just sought to do a lot online, and I think that's something that we'd take as a lesson going forward, in that it's not online. I appreciate some carers find that online is actually easier because you don't have to leave the house. You can still engage while supporting somebody in the house and things like that. But there are a number of carers that I've engaged with in the very short time that I've been working in this role, who find that the online provision isn't fantastic. In terms of from an ethnic minority perspective, I think technology, language can prove to be more of a barrier, as well as obviously culture as well. And one of the things that I know was hailed as part of my sort of induction handover was that when we were really keen to engage with the traveller community, because we know that they don't readily engage with services. There are additional challenges, there's cultural sort of issues there in terms of recognition of being a carer and things like that. And one of what our carer service did was actually when she went physically into the shop, and she started to broker relations through having conversations with some of the younger community members. It took a long time to actually break it down, and then I think from what I can remember, eventually one of the elder ladies of the community came into the shop to meet this woman that the younger community members had been talking about, and we were able to get something that was really, really meaningful from that. But again, it took a long time, and it wasn't the method we'd planned, which obviously is a lesson learned there. But I think if we were to do it again, we'd seek to do a lot wider spread, more physical, face-to-face engagement, because when you do that sort of engagement as well, you get a conversation, you get much more meaning from it. It's much better than some people are put off by online. I'm not there's an opportunity for everything, but things like questionnaires sometimes can be a little bit pigeonholed, whereas you actually get to learn, feel, understand people's experiences when you talk to them face to face.
It's really interesting, because it's one of my kind of passions is about digital literacy and the ability for technology to support, but also the fact that we need to remember that not everybody is digitally literate. I wonder, was that something that you think hampered? Do you think you would have had greater engagement? I'm thinking about new projects, maybe cross fingers in a post-COVID world. Would you encourage potential people to run new projects? Would you encourage them to do them digitally, or would you encourage them to do them face-to-face?
I would have a blended, if I'm honest. I would take a blended approach, and that would be because, as I say, being a carer myself, previously, I know that sometimes it's easier to engage online than it is to, try and arrange to be able to leave the house and, talk and put aside 2 or 3 hours in order to travel, to engage and everything else. So I think there is definitely an opportunity for that for digital to offer some opportunities in order for a wider engagement. But at the same time, as I say, it's that conversation that I think makes the real difference, and people feel valued, and then they want to be a part of it going forward as well. So the more you talk to people, the more you have conversations, the more you're listening, the more people want to come with you, don't they?
Very much. Two questions. One, I'm not sure if you can answer about mental health. Do you know if there was a mental health kind of aspect, or do you think there's lessons for mental health services? Just the way there's a lot of great work happening in South Yorkshire and Basset Law with the caring community and that kind of environment. I don't know if you know if there's anything or.
In relation to this, no, but it's an area that I would like to explore going forward, if I'm honest. So it's one of the areas that I think I've been involved in discussions already in the short time I've been in post, and mental health certainly one of the areas that I think would be a really good opportunity. For the future. I can't say specifically about this project. I'm sorry, I wouldn't want to tell you inaccurately, but I'll ask the question.
Yeah, and people probably don't know this now. I'm sure you don't mind me saying, but we haven't actually formally met yet.
No, it's at 4 o'clock. I hope
we're at 4 o'clock, and as an ex-psyche nurse, I've got mental health. I'm really looking forward to exploring that agenda in South Yorkshire and Basset Law. Maybe we've only got another sort of 4 minutes, and I wondered if I possibly put the cat amongst the pigeon. Catherine Pisano, sorry if I've got your name wrong, has raised the issue about paid participation. Should we, if you were running a project, not specifically you, Therese, I wonder what the group think. I'm sure a lot of the projects that will be up for consideration will have user involvement. Of course they will. Should we be paying people to get involved with our work? Discuss.
I'll raise my hand to that one. Personally, I do think I think there's some opportunity. I think it's beneficial to do that. I think, sometimes people could potentially be paid to do something. It helps them feel valued. It helps them feel like they're making a contribution. They may use the money to support themselves, to cover expenses. Personally, yes. I'll let somebody else talk because I have actually just hogged the dance floor, haven't I? Thank you.
Not at all. I think you can probably imagine my feelings on this. I think the word value was really interesting, but I also take the point of Christine with regards entitled to benefits, and we've got to be really careful in this kind of world at the moment. But as Sam says, experts by experience. Let's pay them for their valuable time.
Dee McGowan, I think you're back in the room.
I am indeed back. Apologies.
Fantastic. We managed to get you moved. I think you went in a different breakout room. Sorry about that.
No worries.
And
Team decided to boot me out entirely.
sorry we didn't quite get started with you, but I think we'll go back and we'll restart your presentation then, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, perfect. Brilliant.
I was just saying that we've got till 2:55 here, so we should be able to get through the next 3 presentations. Any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll attempt to answer them. But it might be questions and answers kind of further down the line, which is what we're planning to do, respond with all questions and answers later on. So if everyone's happy, we could get started, yeah? Over to you, Andy.
Okay, brilliant. Apologies everyone for that. The joy of technology. So hopefully people may have heard who I am. So I'm from Caring Together, and as I mentioned, just in case people didn't hear, we support carers of all ages across Cambridgeshire, Peterborough and Norfolk as well. If we can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, so as I said, our aim is about providing carers with that support so they know where to go to both before, during and after their caring role to ensure they get the support that makes the biggest difference to them. So in relation to this project, if I can go to the next slide, please. So we were the lead partner on this project with our local STP to really look at actually the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community, because in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough there are a number of different traveller sites. There are over sort of 20 different sites in terms of the local authority maintained, and then there are other private sites as well. So the aim was to really sort of actually just try and unpick a bit more about what are some of the barriers to carers from this community accessing support. We are the commissioned provider of support for adult carers in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. We also support young carers through grant funding, but working with our commissioned partners, one of whom's on the call today, we were very aware actually that across all of our services, carers from the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community were significantly underrepresented within all of our services. If we can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of what we were wanting to do, we were wanting to try and understand what is the prevalence of carers in the community, try to understand why some of those carers don't necessarily identify themselves as carers, because that was sort of anecdotally what was coming across from those who were engaged in services, but also really to see, are there any barriers to carers accessing support? And if so, what are those barriers and what can we be doing to remove them? But also it really was to understand what changes do we need to make. So I think often the term is used in terms of hidden carers or in terms of marginalised carers, whereas actually I prefer to focus on a very factual, underrepresented term, because actually these carers aren't hidden. They're not hiding away in a corner. The reality is it's our fault that we're not seeing these carers. We've not got support that meets their needs or is getting the information to them in a way that actually makes it accessible. So it really was about trying to work with some of those carers, but also those workers who are regularly in contact with them, to understand actually what needs to be put in place so that actually we can then look to produce some of those outputs to try and improve that carer support services and ultimately their health and wellbeing outcomes. So if I can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of what went well with the project, so in terms of one of the key successes for us was establishing good relationships with link workers. So through district councils and through the county council, there are key workers who are regularly going on to the various different traveller sites, providing information, helping with form filling, and it really made a huge difference to them having that rapport and having those links, and they were trusted. And I think when I come on to some of the challenges of this project, the timescale meant even without COVID, it would have been really difficult to build up enough trust and rapport of us as an organisation, of our staff who they'd never met, in order to really find out some of those barriers. So we established really strong and regular communication with these link workers. We provided them with information about some of the support that we provided so that they can actually cascade that to some of the carers that they were coming into contact with. And I'll give a couple of examples in a moment of how that really benefited carers from that sense. But particularly with the COVID pandemic, and you'll have heard it earlier, we had to adapt. what was allowed in terms of the rules when we put the bid in was different to when we were awarded. So we had put in plans about going out onto the traveller sites much more, trying to do sort of focus groups in person. But then with lockdowns coming back in, it meant we did have to resort to virtual. What can we do using the telephone? What can we do with the internet? And so what we tried to do was think outside the box. So actually, one of the things that came about was there were quite a number of adults in particular from the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities who were still engaging in online numeracy and literacy learning. So actually what we did is we linked in with a provider of that literacy and numeracy training to ask whether they'd be willing to share the sort of survey that we did as one of the engagement tools with their learners. And so that meant actually in terms of just through that route alone, we had 17 sort of carers and from 17 families respond to that. And whilst in terms of quantifiable and research, it's a very, very small sample size, that's 17 carers who we probably wouldn't have reached before. And actually for us, it was really useful learning as about some of the different ways that we can reach carers through non-traditional routes. So not just focusing on health, not just focusing on social care or the local authority, but seeing where education providers could come into it as well. And that was the same in terms of actually what works for young carers. So as I said, we worked with the commissioned young carers provider in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, Centre 33. I believe one of their staff members is actually in this breakout room. And what that enabled us to do was for them to do some focus groups. Again, they've got the trust, they've got the rapport with those young carers to see what worked. And so there was a young carer called Ryan, and what he really identified was that the key to him being identified was school. He'd moved from school to school to school over a number of years and had never been identified as a young carer. That's really common for lots of young carers to not be identified by school. But the difference here was then when he settled in his school in Cambridge, they did have a young carer school lead who was aware, saw he's caring for his sibling. Actually, did you know you might be a young carer? Here's some support in school. And again, in the focus group with Ryan, he really identified that actually having that support in school was key for him in terms of accessing that support. He didn't think that he would access support outside of school. Couldn't really say why, but it's just that he just didn't feel he would. So I think those different and creative approaches really helped. As an organisation, we thrive on partnership working. It's our way of working. And I think that was really key. I mentioned the link workers before, but also we linked in with others. So our local health watch had been doing some work with the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community prior to COVID. But also we linked in with the testing programme going on in the local area, because they were doing work to take COVID testing out to the traveller sites. And so what that enabled us to do is actually provide some information about support available for them to take out when they were going onto the sites as well. So rather than us trying to duplicate, rather than everyone trying to go out at all, it just meant that we could make the best use of those who were out on the site. And also increasing the recognition of the role of carers in the communities. So really working with those link workers to increase their awareness of carers, thinking actually they will be coming into contact on an everyday basis, and they've got a key role to play in helping to identify. So a prime example about this is, so there's a lady called Margaret. So Margaret was in regular contact with one of the link workers. She cares for an adult sibling from that perspective. And actually what was really identified through this was she didn't have an emergency plan in place. And so it meant the link worker could tell her about it. She could tell her about the benefits of emergency planning. Ultimately, did Margaret register an emergency plan? No, she didn't. And the reason for that was because actually she could see the benefit, but she was really worried about having her details stored on someone else's system, and particularly an organisation who she didn't know. So instead, what we're working on now is creating a family emergency plan template that can be used, because Margaret said actually she's got really, really good support in her community. And actually it was only by having that conversation about emergency planning that she even stopped to think about, well, what would I do in that emergency? And so by producing that template, which means it can be owned by the carer, by their community, without having to share any details at all with us, just means they start to think about what they would do before they get to an emergency as well. And as I mentioned, working with the other commission providers for that all-age approach was really helpful. I think what we found out from the surveys and engagement with adult carers was that they didn't really want things on social media. They didn't use sort of social media to get their information. It was more traditional health and social care routes, GP surgeries, pharmacies and such like, dentists. But Ryan and the young carers said actually for them, social media, text messaging actually was a really useful way to get information. So it really helped us to see one size really doesn't fit all from that perspective. I saw very briefly a message in the chat about a copy of the template. It's in production at the moment, it's being produced. So once we finalised it, then of course we'll be more than happy to share it as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of what would we do differently? So I think the timescale was a pressure. I think if we hadn't have had COVID, it would have been tight. But what it meant is that actually it really made it challenging for us to build that rapport. I think if we were to do it again, in an ideal world, what we'd want to do is over a period of time is actually start to really buddy up with the link workers, start to get one of our staff members regularly engaging with some of those traveller sites once a week, once a fortnight, really giving the opportunity to drip feed some of that information. Because Margaret's a prime example. Margaret didn't register for an emergency plan, but she did allow us to send out a carers magazine to her. She'd never had the carers magazine before, but at least now she's got that resource which contains information that will be beneficial to her, but also anyone else in Margaret's site who she comes into contact with as well. So I think the timescale was one, and also that reliance entirely on virtual as well. I think one of the challenges was the changing in lockdown restrictions, but we also faced a challenge where some of the link workers were redeployed, particularly as the vaccination rollout really increased, to look at how are they going to engage around the vaccination rollout. So that made it a real challenge in terms of competing priorities, which is why we tried to link into opportunities where we could, linking into the COVID testing programme. We couldn't get out onto the sites ourselves, but actually those doing the tests could they take our information? And I think that was the key. None of us can do it all ourselves, so I think that really helped as well. Next slide, please.
Just got a couple of minutes, I think.
Yeah, I'm on to the final couple, which is perfect, and they're quite quick ones. So I'm just going to finish with just some of the findings from the survey that we did as well. So in terms of from the survey, so 80% said that they or someone they know supports someone and could potentially be a carer. So again, really backs up what we hear, that the prevalence of carers is likely to be high in this community. They're just underrepresented in our services. It's not that there aren't carers there. And you can see that quote there. They see themselves more as a caregiver than as a carer. And I think that terminology in terms of can be quite key. We've put a lot of emphasis on labels as well. So it's about how can we get the message across about who carers are and what support's available there. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, internet access was really highlighted as a challenge in terms of being able to get information. But that was coming from a survey of adult carers, whereas actually obviously engaging with young carers like Ryan through the partners, that really identified actually for some of the younger carers, actually it is a really useful means in which to do that. So I think looking at how we get information across, producing potentially easy read materials is one of the ideas that came out that would really benefit about some of the core services, was one of the really key things there. And again, you can see here in terms of actually saying, well, even if I was offered support, they wouldn't take it up from that perspective. So the key for us is about making sure they know what support is available, should they want it, and where to turn. Next slide, please. And then I mentioned about emergency planning earlier. I'm personally a huge fan of emergency planning for all carers from that sense. And I think here, the fact that every single respondent didn't know about the emergency plan scheme or the fact they could have one, but you can see that actually 75% of them said they would consider registering, really shows the value and the benefit of thinking about what would they do in an emergency situation as well. As mentioned here, you talked about in terms of Margaret here from that perspective. Apologies, I said sister, it was her brother from that sense. But I think that was a prime example where she's thought about emergency planning, she's thought about her network, and for me, that's a really positive outcome. For me, that's a success of this project in the sense that actually Margaret has had the conversation and has thought about what she'd do if something happened to her there as well. And then next slide. And I think I've mentioned most of the recommendations there, but also making sure that those link workers know where we have time limited support, because actually it may well be we haven't got the time in terms of to get the information out through our traditional means. So making sure those link workers always know, great, we've got a new bursary scheme available, we've got this scheme and support available. Brilliant. When we did the COVID vaccine support, we were able to support carers to access their vaccine, making sure the link workers knew about that support so they could tell those people when they were seeing them on a weekly basis, fortnightly basis as well. And as
Andy, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just very aware that we've only got 15 minutes or so to run the next two presentations. We are running behind.
You'll be glad to know that's me done.
I'm really, really sorry. I hate stopping anyone, and we
No,
can share. Obviously, all the slides will be shared. That was fantastic. Just such a great piece of work. Really, so co-produced, really creative, really individual approach. Any questions in the chat box, please, and we'll attempt to answer those after this. Thank you so much for that. We're now going to move on to Sam from Gadam and Paul. Are you there?
Hi, Sally. Yeah, I'm here, and it's Andrew as well from the LGBT Foundation.
Andrew, are we able to do this in 7 minutes, guys, or is that a big ask?
If I keep Andrew quiet, I might be able to.
Okay, I'll let you go. Go ahead.
All right, thanks. Next slide, please. Hi, so I'm Sam. I'm from Gadam. We're a charity in Manchester. We cover Greater Manchester. We've been around since 1833. Some of you might have heard of us. We deliver carers contracts as well as doing innovation projects, and one that I'm going to talk to you about as well. And this project, next slide please, was in partnership with LGBT Foundation. Andrew will tell you about that organisation in a second, and also supported by Manchester Health and Care Commissioning. Andrew, do you just want to give a quick brief on LGBT Foundation?
Yeah, we're just a support organisation for LGBT people regarding anything that they might need, and we're obviously aware that there's been a lack of support for LGBT plus carers for a long time, and we've tried to do things that haven't really took off, and this was the first project that has really begun to get people involved.
Thank you. Next slide. Next one, please. And the next one. So just a really quick overview of anyone who doesn't know about the project. So the plan that we submitted for Mind the Gap funding was to set up an LGBT plus advisory group who would kind of co-productively produce a survey that would be sent out, and also kind of act as a steering group for the project. To do that, we used vouchers, which I know we were chatting about before. So we were actually very generous, and we put £50 vouchers for every attendance at meetings. It really did work. So we were getting full attendance at all the meetings, which was fantastic. So we developed the survey, it was sent out, distributed and completed, and then from that we produced a report and recommendations. The report went back to the group and they signed off on how it looked, the images used, quotes, everything in there, so we're really pleased with it. Andrew's just shared the link to the document, which I forgot to do, so if anyone wants to have a look at it, it's there. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. You having a break?
Was it moving?
No.
Technical issues again. I'm going to keep pressing the button.
All right, no problem. I'll keep on talking. The slides, there's a lot of text on them, and I'm not going to read through the text. But if anybody has a look at the report, everything's in the report. I'll just cover a few things really. So some of the things that came back that we kind of asked in the survey was key findings was 49% respondents talked about the physical health and the mental health, and that we asked for comments in terms of services that they'd accessed, and some of the quotes that we got back was carers feeling that they were assumed that they were straight when they were accessing services, that they felt like they had to fight for everything and weren't given the support that they needed. And that they didn't feel connected to people that were in other groups that they were accessing around carers. 55% of the carers who were accessing support services said that work commitments were a big barrier to them accessing services, and then 41% that mental health was another big barrier for them, and that 21% said that the service they were accessing didn't meet their needs as an LGBT person, and they felt that this was a barrier. 43% who had access felt that the support could have been better in terms of them being an LGBT carer, and felt that there was more awareness raising needed, and in terms of communications and marketing of the service, they didn't feel it was very inclusive. 17% said that the services didn't respond to their needs as an LGBT person, and 17% said they were worried they would face discrimination about their identity. So all these findings you'll find in the report. Just some of the key highlights from it. 67% of people who responded said that the support services needed to take more steps to become LGBT friendly. And some quotes from that was, it's often assumed my slightly older partner is my father, and sometimes it seems easier to let this go rather than explain it. Another quote was, some services and signposting about need LGBT champions in their services. So there was a point of contact who understood the community and topics that we might wish to discuss. So from the survey, we completed the report, and as I mentioned, the group did sign it off. And what's happened with the group next? Yeah, thank you. Keep going. What's happened with the group next is we kind of created a really great bond, and the group are continuing to meet outside of the project. So now that the vouchers and the funding have run out, the group have expressed an interest in supporting each other and continuing to meet. And we're actually looking now at developing the group further. So we're looking at kind of social activities, organising walks, looking at kind of getting extra funding in to do more activities for the group, opening up the membership as well. So the plan is to start to kind of communicate the group and to open it up and to ask for more members to join it, not just from Greater Manchester. I'll just give some information around the demographics as well, so that some of these are really interesting. We asked who are the carers caring for, and 51% said that it was the partner. So the LGBT carers, quite high, a majority are caring for their partner, and 10% is friend, and 32% was a parent. We asked them where they were living, and 40% were living in Greater Manchester, but we had responses from London, Scotland, East Midlands, West Midlands, which was fantastic. Around the sexual orientation, there was 20% who identified as a lesbian, 12% bisexual, and then 44% identified as gay. We had a small percentage of heterosexual and 13% who didn't want to be identified either way. And then the gender for the completion of the survey, 47% was male, 31% was female, 10% was non-binary, and 10% didn't want to be identified in any way. We also had 20% of people completing who were different gender identities, the gender they were given at birth. And in terms of ethnicity, it was 80% white British, and then there was a real mix of other ethnicities from that.
Sam, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to draw it to a close. I'm so sorry. Okay, final comment was just, I would ask everyone to have a look at the report. If anybody's got any questions, just get in touch with myself or Andrew. And thank you for your time. Thank you so much, Sam and Andrew. Sorry we've had to cut them slightly shorter. All of these will be on futures that you can see in more detail, and the ones that are obviously in different breakout rooms as well. But a brilliant project, and the fact that this has got some longevity as well, and there's further things planned and a real keenness to keep that going, is a real credit to the way the project's been planned and executed. So well done. Our next speaker is Sue Ito, I think I've said that right, from Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland.
Yes, it's actually Paul Winterbottom that's going to do our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to leave you to it. I know we've got limited time, so I'm really sorry about that.
Okay, we've got slide one, please. Thank you. There we go. Thanks for the opportunity to speak very briefly today with you about our project run by Leicestershire County Council as part of the Every Voice Counts project. My name is Paul. I am a non-executive director for a skills centre working with adults with learning disabilities in northwest Leicestershire. Slide 2, please. We've heard a lot today of the phrase co-production, and these are our co-producers. We recognise that we have our own strengths, but equally that we have our own weaknesses, and the more and different skill sets we can bring to a project, the better. So we have people here who have first-hand knowledge of the caring community. We have people who have IT knowledge. We have people who are more on the statutory side of things. And together we formed a cohesive project steering group, able to speak to our potential beneficiaries in order to devise the project in the first place, and then go on to deliver it. And here you see what the project is all about as well, namely a free tablet loan scheme to carers and those they care for across the whole of the county. Next slide, please. The project is all about connectivity. Every voice counts, seeks to explore new ways for carers and the learning disability community to connect and communicate with mainstream organisations, be it the NHS, county council, voluntary or support groups. And not just communication through the written word or face-to-face, but looking at alternative methods, maybe through the use of widget symbols, pictures, music. So there are greater opportunities for people to engage. Can we skip a couple of slides? And the next one. So a quick couple of case stories, which we thought we'd share with you. Tony described himself as a British Asian. He used to live with his mother and his sister, but sadly his mother passed away last year. And he is now the sole carer for his sister. He would describe himself as data poor, but he's willing to give things a go. He's isolated, he's always been isolated, and COVID certainly increased that feeling of isolation for him. We lent him a tablet, and if you can go to the next slide, please. Here you can see what he thought of, skip back one. Here you can see what Tony thought about the tablet loan scheme. Each of the tablets were loaded with 32 gig of mobile data per month. So there was plenty of opportunity for that to be used. And it's interesting, isn't it? You know, we think of people sometimes with disability, or the wider population perhaps do, as, you know, as somebody who might be in a wheelchair. Those people have little first-hand knowledge, or that being accessible in the community simply means a wider door or a ramp, when actually it means an awful lot more than that. It means different types of help. And we believe that the tablet loan scheme has helped that. Can we skip again, please? And perhaps skip 2. Not all learning has been good. And another one, we'll skip another one, please. We've learned some lessons, and we've learned them the hard way. You know, with the UK now spending more time than any other European country online, we'd assume that people would have had a rudimentary working knowledge of IT. We were wrong in that assumption. You know, we've had reports that some carers, for whatever reason, didn't take the tablet out of their box. Could it be because they were afraid of dropping it or losing it? And we did have one lost, and we have to ask, you know, how we deal with that looking ahead. Could it be that they required more training? And we definitely think that's a possibility. More classroom or one-to-one coaching was not possible during the COVID outbreak, but looking ahead, that is clearly something that we would wish to move forward with. Next slide, please. And again. And so, one more slide. Yeah, Sue, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah. So we think that our project has been really successful, had a really successful start. We have a lot more work to do. These things can't be rushed. Our partnerships can't be rushed, and certainly our relationship building with the carers that have helped us to co-produce this can't be rushed. So we're in the process of evaluating, getting some much more detailed evaluation. We're trying to look for sponsors to help us to match fund this project so that we can spread it out further. We've got 15 tablets. We want a lot more. We want to actually develop the training. We want to do that with the people that are using the tablets. I know we've got one person, I think his name's Tony, that is very keen. So we want to train him up to actually support individuals. We possibly need to buy more online data. We want to set up champions. So we've got some big ideas for the project. But again, it takes time, especially if you're doing it in co-production. If you're co-designing it with the carers, we have to go at their pace and not ours. So yeah, we're quite delighted with what we started. We haven't promoted it yet in a big way as well. So we've got some more leaflets to create and some more posters. And once we've got that in place, once we've evaluated the project properly, we'll be launching it and spreading it out with the local press. So thank you, NHS, for the funding.
Oh, that was perfect timing. Thank you so much for that. I'm glad we were able to steal a few more minutes back just to get the full presentation. Thank you, everybody, to everybody who's presented. We will be automatically taken back into the other room in a minute, so we'll just catch our breath. Any questions, we're jotting them down, and you will be given questions and answers later on. So we haven't forgotten about those, just so that you know. I'm just letting my team know that we are ready to go back. If anyone's got any questions that they want to fill the gap for a minute or so, then that's fine.
I think we've been invited to join the main meeting by active selection of join button.
Okay, you might have to press something, yes, to go back in. Takes a few seconds. Then you'll all start disappearing. The joy of Teams. Sorry, there's just a delay in that we're working out whether we go back in ourselves or we're being brought back in. Sorry about that.
Join the group because it's doing it.